you start your intro about this piece, talking about the invasion of Iraq, financial crisis, now the movement, mass movements of peoples. And it's sort of like a great time to be you in a way. It's a great time to be David Hare in terms of the kind of work that you've been writing about for many years. So tell us a little bit about working on this piece and working in TV.
Well, it was just that nobody was really writing. I think the BBC, the minute I started writing about illegal immigration, the BBC became frenzied. Because obviously it's a hugely important subject, and in fiction at least nobody's writing about it, or nobody has written about it on television. And so the whole thing was fast-tracked, for which I have to thank the BBC very much, though it put everybody else under huge pressure, not least S.J., in order that there'd be something on the screens on this subject by February. And because I'd never written episodic television before, it was like being under the cosh, really, because I was writing as fast as I possibly could. And also Carey was pregnant, and so we were also trying to make it as fast as we possibly could before she had the baby.
Oh, why did you choose TV? Why did you go to the Beeb and not choose
I didn't choose TV. I wrote a film.
Okay.
I wrote it as a film originally, and I went to Christine Langan at the BBC, and she just said to me, this thing has got 10 leading parts, and you cannot in a film have 10 leading parts. Because it's, as you will see from the first episode, it's about how one incident resonates in all these different institutions, which you don't yet really see. Illegal immigration and the detention centres become very much the focus of the later episodes. But so does the church, so does Parliament, so does the army, and obviously the police. And so she said to me, "You're mad not to do this as television, and not least because the people that this is about will see it if you put it on television, whereas if you make it as a film, it'll show at the Curzon Doody for 2 weeks."
Or the BFI.
At the BFI. and nobody that the film is actually about will ever see it, which was a pretty powerful argument, really.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What were the things of the tools of this episodic drama?
Episodic drama, it's hell on earth. It's hell on earth because the expectation is that you have to, as it were, cliffhang, meaning that you're meant to do something at the end of every episode that gets people to watch the following week. But we tried to disregard that, didn't we? Yeah.
And also,
it's a completely different form. The 60-minute form is something that I haven't worked in since my first television films. When I did Play for Today in the 1970s, they were all 60 minutes long, so it was a form I was familiar with then. But to do it, I think of it really as one long film, only it just happens to be cut in 4 pieces, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's something about the aftermath, isn't there? You start with a cliffhanger, effectively. You start with the action right at the beginning. What is it about that kind of that format that helps you tell the story in the way that you wanted to tell it?
Well, it's just that there's a very complicated structure, as you can see, which will resonate on through 4 hours. And basically what the series is partly about is institutions, and about why at the moment we don't feel institutions are working for us. And people who work within institutions feel that they seem to be constituted in a way to stop them doing what they have to do. So I don't want to give away anything about what happens in the 3 successive episodes. But in each case of these institutions, people are faced with situations in which they either defy the institution or they conform with the institution. And in each case, the decision has an upside and a downside. And in particular for Carey's character, Kip, the whole thing becomes really about a punt, a guess that she takes, which is in defiance of police procedure. I think I can say that without giving anything away.
Great, thank you. And so, S.J., you have this incredible career spanning kind of superhero genre, TV, like Jessica Jones, through to work like this. It's kind of as wide a spread as possible. So what's that like? How is it making that jump, and how do you choose? What are the things that make you choose a piece of work to work on?
Say yes to what I'm offered, really.
Right.
No, I
Turned down a lot more.
yeah, I suppose I'm always trying to do something different. And you know, I never wanted to get caught in a pigeonhole of, oh, you did Life on Mars, so now you do all the 70s or the cop shows, or, you know, any of those type of things, or Whitechapel, so now you do all the sort of period thrillers. I always wanted to just completely change it up, and it's about the challenge, really. And I think this came at a perfect time for me in many ways, because I had done Jessica Jones, and I'd done Defenders, which was 4 superheroes coming together, which was fantastic fun, running around New York City. And but this script came in, and I was sent it by George Faber and Mark Pybus at The Forge, and who had the genius idea of putting us two together, because in many ways we're very different, but actually our sensibilities and how we think about the world in many ways are similar. But and I read it, and I just was absolutely there from the off, and David and I had a conversation, and I was hugely excited about the opportunities of this. I think it was the fact that it was about institutions, and it was the fact that it was saying something about where we are now. But equally, what was incredibly challenging as a director is you do have all these characters and all these worlds, and how are we going to tie all that together and make sure that you felt fulfilled every time you were in each one? You didn't feel you were being cheated, or you didn't feel you were with one longer than the other, or one got more sort of cinematic, you know, extravagance than the other. It was this constantly keeping things moving, with Carey sort of as I call it, the pivot at the centre of it, taking us everywhere. So it was that was one of the most exciting challenges of it, I think.
And how did you meet it? What were the kind of tricks? Let's behind the scenes in terms of the approach that you decided to take with this. Was there anything that
a lot of cheap tricks, if you know directing? You know, a lot of transitions are a big thing, I think, in this. I mean, David and I, one of the most joyful parts of this process was sitting in David's studio and talking through the scripts together, acting them out sometimes, not that we'll admit it. Well, we did, didn't we?
We're very good.
We were very, very good. Yeah. In fact, don't bother watching 2, 3 and 4. We'll just read them for you.
Yeah, my Kip Glaspie is really something.
Yeah, he always stole Kip as well. If ever I got a Kip scene and I started, halfway through he'd just suddenly be Kip, and I'd be like, what's this about, David? I'm now, you know, whoever. And, you know, he reads it. So we went through the scripts in absolute attention to detail.
Pregnant pole vaulters.
Pregnant pole vaulters, etc. He said, how are you going to do the pole vaulting? I said, yeah, we'll get to that. But so we went through it, and so it was having an absolute understanding of where it was coming from, and knowing where those transitions needed to be. And so it was a lot about the transitions leading. It was like having a baton in a relay, handing one to the other. So there's quite an obvious one at the beginning where Billie Piper shuts her door and then Jane slams the gate. So some of those visual transitions, and other times it's a head turn when Nathan looks around over his shoulder, and then we have Suki, Kim's character, you know, looking back at David. So it's constantly that you're sort of misdirecting, but also directing the audience in a different way. So lots of transitions and keeping a fluidity of movement to it, I think, which was exciting. And then when you did have a lot of people, to try and keep the shots as fluid as possible, hence the big one at the crime scene, which was as much about keeping those characters all moving and together, and setting ourselves a humongous challenge for, was it day 1 or 2? Was
One.
Yeah, it was really early on. We shot
Which
that. The crime scene, when this one arrived.
Oh, wait, no, it was my day 1.
It was your day 1.
It was your day 2.
Yeah, it was day 1.
Yeah, it was day 1.
It was our day 2. But it was great, because we sort of like that helped us meld everything together, and it was a great bonding time for the company, actually, because there's so many of our cast were in that, and we had a phenomenal cast, a lot of whom are here tonight, which was lovely to see. But they were absolutely, everybody's phenomenal from Carey all the way down, and we all got together and sort of figured out that this style had to be, things kept moving, and I guess at the fore of it was about the characters moving me through the story rather than us making sure that they fit within the frame, so to speak.
And Carey, this is kind of quite an extraordinary shoot for you, because you were pregnant, you were really, really pregnant, and also you've worked with David before, but obviously on stage, on Skylight. But so how did this differ, kind of working with David? And you don't really have, I've seen that huge rehearsal time and all of that on TV, so how did you arrive at the role?
I'd worked with David pregnant already.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's right.
She only works with me pregnant. So I'm very much hoping for a third child soon.
Yeah, I did the second run of Skylight pregnant, which David was very cool about. So when this came my way, I said, oh my goodness, really, really want to do it, but I'm 5 weeks. I mean, David's one of the first people who knew about having a baby, because I was about 5 weeks pregnant when he sent it to me. So how was it different? In a way, a lot of ways, we spent decent time together
Did you?
before. Yeah, more than I have on a lot of jobs, really. We all sat in a little room and went through it. And David was in a decent amount on set. Would you say? Just enough.
Yeah.
He pops in. He just suddenly lands and then he disappears.
He comes in for the scenes he's really interested in.
What Carey's not saying is that she's incredibly good on script, and I think that there were certain scenes that Carey felt very strongly about, and I would say, with absolutely no embarrassment whatsoever, were infinitely improved by what you wanted to do with them. And I'm very used to actors. Obviously, if you work in the movies, and particularly if you work in American movies, you're well used to actors who want to change things, and they mostly want to change things in order to make the audience understand better what they are feeling. So they think a nice long speech will elucidate what it is they're undergoing, and those are horrific kinds of rewrites to undertake. But I think Carey was really onto wanting to make it as realistic as you possibly could, didn't you?
Yeah, but
you wanted.
I think there was nice little, there was nice things that we, being pregnant was something that suddenly had to become part of the story, and that was a really nice kind of discussion of figuring out how to do that. And what I loved is that there was no oh, goodness me, oh, he kicked and all that stuff.
No pregnant acting
Yeah, no
allowed.
pregnant acting was allowed. And David also said, and S.J. both said no crying, which was a revelation for me, because I'm constantly crying. So she doesn't cry, and this pregnancy thing is like she's a working woman, she's getting through it. So that was a really interesting part of the kind of preparation for it.
And it's
Yeah, she's a heroine who is on screen for 4 hours and does not cry once, I'm proud to say.
Right. Yeah. And also, I mean, it is. I remember actually sitting on this stage with Carey Mulligan and some other writers about the lack of seeing pregnant women on screen who aren't playing pregnant women. You might get off in a side character that happens, is pregnant, and that's the point. She has to be pregnant. So there was something quite, deeply refreshing about seeing someone who just happened to be pregnant doing a big job. But there's lots of night shoots on this, right? So it was kind of pretty. We haven't seen the others, so we don't know if there's
There's
dark.
a lot of night. And so what you do when you're filming night is you shoot it in British summertime.
Right.
It's just what you do when we
right.
have curfews across London and
Yeah.
locations department tearing their hair out and everybody else. So it was pretty challenging. But I think about one. I think there's almost 2 nights across the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
In terms of filming.
filming, huh?
In terms of the episodes, as it were.
Okay.
2 of them, mostly 2 are at night.
And what was it about this script, Carey, for you that made you go, yeah, apart from being pregnant and having to work with David, but what else was it that kind of made you?
I wanted to, I think I, wanted to do something about now. I think I've done a lot of, I similarly like not doing the same thing. I'd done lots of period things, all of which I did believing that they had something to say about now, but they weren't today. So I was interested to do something contemporary. I was interested to play this woman that we talked about, who is a professional, but not a dog's body, and has a real backbone, and is in control of herself, and. And it was just the writing was so brilliant, and I wanted to be a part of an S.J. Clarkson extravaganza.
And this is the first time you guys had worked together.
Yes.
The first of
many, I'm sure. I hope. Yeah.
And
It was an extraordinary thing that Carey wanted to do it at once, but what also happened was that I think everybody wanted to do it. In other words, that it's very rare that you write something, and I think in terms of availability, everybody who was available, who was our first choice, did it. And Billy Piper we didn't even think of, because the part is not the leading part, and we hadn't thought of Billy. And Billy's agent simply rang us and said, Billy's read this and she'll play that part. And we said, well, that part is not going to be it's not a leading part, and Billy wanted to play it. And I think actors really want to do material that is about that annexes new subject matter, that annexes stuff you haven't seen on television. I'm trying my very best to avoid police procedural throughout. There are no computers in the show at all. There are absolutely no whiteboards on which Pentel names with photos and people going and arrows going, you know. There is absolutely none of all that, because although I extravagantly admire Line of Duty and think it's fantastic, I do nevertheless feel that police procedural is a genre that is just, about which there's nothing to add about police procedural. It's been done to death. And so this is as little, I think, when you're talking about how S.J. directed it, she tried to direct it as little like a police procedural as possible. I did say no flashing blue lights, but it finally becomes impossible not to have any flashing
I was like,
blue.
David, you have to get over that. You
Yeah.
have to have flashing blue
Yeah, but there
lights.
aren't any in episode 2
You
or 3.
didn't even want our cool onesie.
Yeah, he didn't want the onesie.
Yeah, and you didn't like
But I
getting-
needed it. We
I
needed
like-
that.
You didn't like getting
Yeah,
your
cool
badge
ones.
out.
Oh, I
No,
did
you don't like getting the badge out.
Harry hated having to take her badge out.
I felt really self-conscious about it, because you play a police officer and you're like, no one's going to believe I'm a police officer. And the first couple of times you pull out your badge, you feel
I was
so
like, you need to
stupid.
hold it up for longer. No, it was literally like that.
But I mean, you're following in the footsteps of a long line of women playing cops and playing detectives. I mean, fantastically, that's almost a genre in and of itself, isn't it? So how did you consider that when you took this role? Did you think I'm gonna have to
No.
do something different? You didn't worry about it? No.
I worry about everything, but I didn't specifically worry about that. No, I think, I've seen so many brilliant performances, and I just tried not to think about it too much, because I don't, my tendency is to see someone do, like Olivia Colman in The Night Manager, or someone doing something brilliantly and being like, oh, I'll just do a bit like that, and then it'd be rubbish. So I tried to, not rubbish. Yeah, it would be rubbish, actually, because it wouldn't be as good as that. So you we just focused in on who she was and tried to make that interesting and make her her own person. I tried not to think about her as, she's not born a police officer. She doesn't come out of the womb a police officer.
humanity,
She's a
yeah.
person, and then that becomes her job through a series of things that happen to her that lead her to that point. So it was more sort of, we talked a lot about how she got to the place that she was in,
Yeah.
which is interesting, including a almost Olympic pole vaulting career.
Okay, explain this. So the moment when it's like, hang on, I recognised you, weren't you? And it's like, huh? It's like the most random thing. Why a pole? Why?
A lot of people
Olympic pole
recognise her
vaulter?
throughout the 4 episodes because of the pole vaulting incident, and there is a sequence about the pole vaulting.
I just remember reading it in the
fourth
script and thinking, if
episode.
they try and put me in lycra, I will murder someone. I'm not doing it.
This is what I was saying about how you have to have a cliffhanger, which is, that I'm trying to get the audience back every week to see the pole vaulting scene.
And you wait till
So
you
I've
see
it.
it.
The principles of episodic television. You
absolutely.
dangle the prospect
That's right.
of Carey going over the, in front of them.
But I mean, I suppose a question back to you, David, about trying to make a police drama, but that
Yes,
isn't
I'm
a
trying to make the
procedural.
police like people. In other words,
Yeah.
that they're completely normal people, and there isn't any of that police attitudinizing. Police are different from other people in that they do what's called present, meaning that they're taught at police school how to stand in that particular way in which you physically are slightly different from people who don't
Are you
present.
honestly taught that? You're taught
Yeah.
that?
At college, you're taught how to present. Meaning, if you enter a pub and there's a fight going on, you know how to stand, so that you stand in a particular way that suggests authority and how to think. But apart from that, as Carey says, I tried to make them as much like people as possible, and people working in a frustrating institution, just as the people who are working in the church are in a frustrating institution. And this theme develops in the later episodes about how MI5 regard the police, and what we don't understand about the police, because we think of them as authority, they themselves think of themselves as very low down the pecking order. In other words, the security services and the special branch, though it's about to be disbanded, I believe, and the anti-terrorists and everybody above them treats them as Ben Miles's character says in this episode, as the country cousins, the people who are just the help, the servants. And the police have a very strong grudge about that they're treated as if they're, not thinkers, that they're just bodies who are meant to turn up and quell trouble. And so that sort of structure of how all that works, I knew a bit about and enjoyed writing about. You know.
I don't know. That's going to ruin the whole thing. We never had to shoot it. Thank goodness, we never had to shoot. I never had. Did you? No, you didn't shoot it.
You're not in. Well, you're in.
I'm not in it. I'm not in it. It's not me.
Okay. And a more general question: what was the biggest challenge of being pregnant and taking the lead role in this drama?
It was the pole vaulting train. The biggest challenge of being pregnant was just literally in the night scenes towards the end. I was about 7 months pregnant, and we were driving around. Nat and I were driving around London all night with S.J. in the in the footwell of the back seat because she wanted to be in there with her little monitor, and the baby was just going mental, kicking me, and it was mega uncomfortable. But other than that, it just didn't really feature.
I suppose what I wanted to avoid, I guess there's a term that's known in the business and maybe outside as gritty BAFTA, which is, you know, when you tackle a subject like this, it's a lot of like handheld shaky cameras and you kind of, it's almost obs docky feel. And I didn't want to do that. And I wanted the characters, as David had written for them, to be real and to be believable. And I think what I was so taken with David's writing, other than the fact that it's utterly brilliant and a 7-page scene which normally you would hack in half as a director, with David you go, please can you give me 3 pages more because it's so delicious, is his wit and his openness to embrace that wit and allow the director to come in and play with it a little bit. And when we talked about that in the room and when we talked about allowing some of the humour to come through, that lent itself to sort of being more cinematic and allowing the characters to play within their frame. And one of the reasons I chose 235 to film on was because I like the idea of showing these characters within their establishments and within their environments. So it was, these characters were, you know, within these institutions that they were fighting. So you always had them and the institution or the arena that they were playing in constantly up against each other, juxtaposed, so you didn't have to sort of cut away to all of these detail all the time. It was hopefully just being played out, and as I said earlier, the characters really led me through much of the cinematic style, really, if that answers the question.
But I mean, I thought it's interesting watching it on the small screen and then watching it here, where it looks like it's made for here. You know, it looks like it's
I mean, I
made
did.
for
I think, as David said, you know, I never. You know, it's frustrating because people go, oh, it's television or it's film, but I don't think there's any difference. You're a director and you're making a film, you're telling a story, and it really was, as David said, it's a 4-hour movie that we wouldn't make people suffer through in 4 hours. Although I do think binge viewing this is the way I'd advocate watching it. But I think that it is. It allows itself to be cinematic just in the writing, in the scope, in the characters, and the fact that it's about London. And London is a phenomenal city, if challenging city to film in, but it is a phenomenal city, and to have that up on screen, you want to sort of show it at its best, and you want to embrace that. And I think everything, you know, I try and do, and I think a lot of television is doing now, is not being afraid of that big, wide frame. And because people watch it, there was always, people are watching on a small TV, but TVs, other than mine, as my DP always criticises me, is small, but everybody else has a big television apart from me. And also people watch movies on iPads and iPhones, so I think they're very, you know, attuned to that. So yeah, we made it like a film. Filming in Waterloo, I'm trying to remember making eye contact with my coaching manager. We ended up in Waterloo because it was originally Victoria Coach Station, I think, that we weren't able to film in. We got refused permission, I think. And Waterloo were incredibly friendly about us filming there in the evening once it had stopped. We could film there early, which was great because we had loads of people giving us the V's in the back of the shot, so that was helpful. So that got cut out, so that was really good. So Waterloo was great there. But once it got dark and the cleaners came in, it was brilliant. The toilets aren't at Waterloo. Sorry to disappoint. They're at Ealing. There's some production office in Ealing. But Waterloo gave us that scope, and the walkway to it was just, I'd been there once or twice before, but it was when we were walking in, I think, from a scout one day, and we came along it, and it just felt very, very eerie. The lockers aren't there, but we put those lockers in because it just felt right, and it felt the best place for Jeannie, who plays Sandrine, to be running around, which was great.
I think S.J. had more problems than she's making out, in the sense that, obviously, you know, an important part of the film is set in Yarlswood, or the equivalent is it's called Harlesfleet in my. But as the thing develops, then we go to a removal centre, and obviously, you know, we're not going to get any cooperation from removal centres, not after the Channel 4 documentary. We're not. And similarly, you know, as you can see, a certain amount of it concerns the army, and it was impossible to film in real locations because, again, the army asked us whether this presented a positive view of the army. And so I think S.J. has been unbelievably ingenious. There were even, because the vicar, played by Nicola Walker, is in a gay relationship. There were also bishops who refused to let us film in their diocese because they would not let us show a woman priest who lived with another woman. They said, we don't need that kind of problem in our diocese, thank you very much. So it's so difficult, and you combine that with the terrorist incidents last summer, and it is an absolute triumph of ducking and diving and ingenuity from S.J., because really filming in London is very, very difficult, and an awful lot of institutions are now very hostile to filmmakers, and it needs incredible persistence to make something on this canvas on a budget that is a television budget and not a movie. Paul Greengrass can get Waterloo Station for 40 minutes of film, for a feature film at whatever price, but, you know, S.J.'s nipping in a 2-hour window to get what she needs to get. And it's really an incredible tribute to her that the film is on this superb, large canvas.
Can I just also ask, just to kind of slightly reframe the last questions about your research process, though? So what do you have research?
Well,
choice?
I've done so many things that involve real life. The last 2 films that I've written are Denial, where I absolutely felt that I had to stick scrupulously to historical fact, which was the film about the Lipstadt Irving case. And similarly, I've written a film about Nureiev's defection, where again I felt it was terribly important that I tell the story exactly as it happened. So with this, I felt a fabulous freedom that I could actually invent and bugger research. And I cannot tell you how delightful it is not to have to worry about reality, and to do exactly what you want to do and feel free. And then once I had written it, yes, of course, we then run it by, you know, police advisors and people who came to help us, and obviously Yarlswood. And the most important element, and I can't stress this enough, we felt, both S.J. and I felt, a tremendous responsibility about being truthful to the experience of people who make that journey across the Mediterranean, and very, very squeamish about feeling that in no way were we exploiting them or using them as bones to make soup with. And Ahad Kamel, who plays Fatima, it was, you know, again, talking about the participation of actors, to have a Saudi actor in the film telling us, yes, this is appropriate, or this is not appropriate, yes, this is how it would be, that's not how it would be. And I think, you know, more than anything, S.J. and I felt that we wanted to make it entirely appropriate, the way that journey was treated as part of a contemporary drama. And I believe, again, that S.J. succeeded in that, and that there's nothing exploitative at all, I hope, in the way that subject is treated.
I think for most of the female actresses I know, it's been about just going where the better writing is. That films have tended to provide a lot for men in terms of great leading roles and not so much for women. So I think that seems to have been, you know, when you can do like Big Little Lies and have 4 or 5 or 6 extraordinary roles written for women, where there'd be maybe one or half of one in a couple of films. I think it's been led by the writing and the opportunities, particularly for women, and that's certainly the case for me. I want to play the most interesting, complicated, real person, and interesting, complicated, real people in film are really, really rare, and you kind of wait around for them. And I really wanted to work again with David, and wanted to work with S.J. And I really enjoyed playing a character for longer as well. Getting to spend, how long did we do it for?
A long time.
It felt like ages, in a good way. But that was really nice because, you know, and often if you play a supporting role in a film, you're there for like 2 weeks and you feel like, oh, I didn't really get to figure this person out at all. But
We had to work back into the bump. That's how long it was.
the
wasn't
bump,
it?
yeah, we started with
we
fake
started with
bump.
a fake bump, and then
Bump got taken away pretty quickly to real bump.
bump came on pretty quick. Yeah, yeah.
It was the length of a bump.
Yeah, the length of a bump. That's the technical term. The length of a bump.
But yes, to answer your question, I think vaguely, and not very well, I think essentially just following great writing, trying to play real people and not play the girlfriend, the wife. And I've done that a lot as well, and it's not fun. And this was just an opportunity to play a really, really fully rounded, flawed, interesting person.
It is so flaming obvious that, you know, there's 750 million of us in Europe, and that there's been this, you might say, hysterical reaction to a further million people joining us. And so this obviously is the great, I think, the great story of our time. In other words, the question is clearly whether we in privileged countries are going to put up walls and live behind barriers and say the rich stay rich forever and the poor stay outside forever. And is this really going to be the story of the 21st century? So that really, and obviously, you know, since I wrote it, then, you know, Donald Trump has been talking about putting up a wall to stop people, immigrants from Mexico, and sending back immigrants who are already in the country for many, many years from El Salvador. You know, Ideal in the second episode, there's a character who is being sent home after 30 years and of living in this country. And some of the people that I met in Yarlswood, the women that I met in Yarlswood, there were people who had spent their entire life in this country, and they're now being sent back to countries of which they have absolutely no knowledge. They're being told to go home, in quotes, and yet home is somewhere they left when they were 3. And so, you know, clearly this is the major story of the 21st century, and I'm only nibbling in this at one small corner of it, so to speak. But obviously I think it's a very important story to be thinking about and telling, you know.
Most challenging thing, there were lots of little there was fun challenges. It was quite fun. One of our first things was this epic oneer, which was the first crime scene where the whole thing is in one take.
7.5 pages. Yeah.
7.5 pages in one take, and that was like theatre. That was so fun because we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed in daylight, and then the minute it was dark, we just started shooting this thing, and it was just as much as someone being like a second late on their line, or or not being able to zip up your cool onesie thing. What are they called again?
Socko suit.
Socko suits. And, so that would ruin it. But I don't know, I think the challenge, what was challenging about it? I had a really good time. It was really fun. It was really nice to do something where I was just having a fun time every day. I think, I don't know, S.J., what was hard? You tell me. I'm blanking a little bit. I was pregnant. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was. No, I think it was. I think the biggest challenge of it was sort of filming. I speak for all of us, and I think David mentioned earlier. It's very difficult filming it. We mentioned about a show at night. You don't have enough hours of night, so often we were doing one scene over 3 nights, and sometimes they were 3 weeks apart. So that was sometimes challenging. But Carey's so on it. She's utterly brilliant and comes so prepared, and it's always a conversation. And we talked a lot, didn't we? So I think it was. It almost felt effortless, but it was very, very hard.
But
I
I think
it was an easy
like
gig.
the one thing, and I wasn't kidding, like right at the beginning, I was like, no one is going to believe I'm a police officer. This is ridiculous, because they have such authority, and I'm scared of them. And I was like, no, and then I look, and the first time I put on the Socko suit, I looked like a Teletubby because I'm pregnant and I've got this thing, and I was like, this is silly, no one's going to buy this. And so it was kind of convincing myself that I was grown up. And I still think I'm like 21 and the ingenue, and then I'm like, oh, I'm a grown up, actually, and maybe I could have a proper job, but you don't think of yourself like that. So I think part of the challenge for me at the beginning was being like, take it sick, I am a police officer, and not just like, anyway. So that was the hard bit, probably, was kind of believing it in the first place.
And that's what I particularly liked actually about your performance in this, is because there was a different side of you that I think we got to see as well, and it was like, I wouldn't mess with, you definitely had this absolute authority actually in that role. So that's what I really particularly liked about your performance. So you nailed it. You could get a proper job.
Thanks.
thank you all, actually, because I
Thank
know
you.
this is a really kind of naked, I think the word was used, you know, to show a piece of work to a live audience, almost seeing it for the first time yourself. So that was really brave, and you were all fantastic, and the work is fantastic. And tell everyone to watch it from February. It's going to be great. Thank you so much for coming. It's really
Thank
great
you.
to have you here.